Hello, my name is Ava Hayes, and the title of my poster presentation is Seeds for Salmon: How Your Garden Can Improve Salmon Habitat. Private urban gardens are the most abundant form of urban green space in most cities, especially as many populations are proving to be moving into cities every year. These urban gardens have the potential to be an opportune location for native-dominated plants, although typical lawns tend to not have a diversity of them. In addition, even though human nature values green, a color perceived as a symbol of nature, environment, sustainability, and life, the only green we see are lawns full of grass. Grass is easy to maintain, but does nothing to provide for the diversity of nearby wildlife, and does little to combat runoff, the most detrimental side effect towards salmon with habitat loss. This is important to consider when Pacific salmon stocks are listed as threatened or endangered due to the detrimental effects that gardens can attribute to. Speaking of, when you think of gardens, you most often think of butterflies, squirrels, bees, and other pollinators and critters. But has salmon ever crossed your mind? Society tends to disconnect the relationship our private land has with nature, especially as we move further away from natural spaces as mentioned earlier. This is also true with connecting terrestrial environments with aquatic or marine environments, and that there is little available literature that intersected land-based management, notably gardening, with salmon habitat. This was shocking, especially with the number of interconnected watersheds and river systems that we have within the Puget Sound alone, affecting our threatened and endangered salmon populations right at our doorstep. Becoming aware of this information, I formulated this research question. What are the ways that NOAA Fisheries can encourage the public that native plants are vital to salmon habitats? In my internship with NOAA's West Coast region, I was able to answer my research question through their new Seeds for Salmon campaign. I had the opportunity to speak with 6 experts that worked in landscape management, habitat restoration, and communication and outreach coordination. Through these informational interviews, I was able to learn what issues need to be addressed within salmon conservation and garden practices, and what actions NOAA can take to encourage folks to choose native plants through a suite of infographics. Prior to drafting these infographics, though, I researched impacts from landscaping and filtered for gardening practices, refreshed my knowledge around the physical and chemical needs of salmon and their habitat, and investigated the human values of private green space. What I found through this project were 5 main themes. The first is that transdisciplinary collaboration of habitat experts with effective communicators in education and outreach fields can create holistic and well-rounded materials. The second is that with proper education and effective communication on garden effects through being mindful of fonts used in materials or the saturation and effectiveness of colors can increase accessibility. I also incorporated ethnobotany within my infographics and learned that there should be an emphasis on Indigenous science and ethical considerations for scientific common and native names. My fourth is that when landowner preferences are valued, there is encouragement to connect an expert's recommendation into practice, ensuring salmon-friendly garden practices. My fifth and final theme is that when we bridge human activities like gardening with conservation, we can connect humans in the environment. Marine conservation centers, like NOAA, can center these issues through education and outreach, which can address the lack of resources around land and water that we find. People are encouraged with the right definitions connecting native, non-native invasive plants, a step-by-step guide for what foundations are needed to create salmon-friendly practices, and increase accessibility for readability and graphic materials. While many infographics recommend specific species to incorporate in gardens, the most effective way to engage people is to give the freedom for them to incorporate their values into their garden space, and thus protecting not only their garden, but salmon and maybe other aquatic species too. I'd like to thank my site supervisor, Alicia Keefe, and the WCRO team for their assistance and collaboration on my project. To my faculty advisor, Tom, for his insight and curated knowledge around salmon conservation and literature. To my 6 interviewees for sharing their stories and expert opinions that help shape the themes of my project, and my POE Capstone cohort for their constant support, insight, and feedback. I would also like to thank my friends and family for their love and guidance throughout this capstone, and I could not have done this project without you all. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.